So, end of last module, we did I had you do a brief exercise on, comparing how we use the word good for a hammer versus how we use it for a person. Okay. Now I'm going to go into another individual's analysis of the word good and its use. Specifically, this is the philosopher G.E. Moore's analysis. So, quick background. G.E. Moore was a major British philosopher at the turn of the 20th century, and he's most notable for having written this book, which is just a giant treatise in metaethics called Principia Ethica, right? Meaning principles of ethics, basically, where he examines the use of the term good, right? Um, and the very nature of value judgments, right? It's a little under 200 pages, if I recall correctly, or a little over, no, under, right? And he divides the work into just like what is the nature of value judgments? Is there anything that's clearly objective about moral value judgments? And then he spends basically a second third of the book examining the nature of the word good. And he concludes that there are only two sorts of uses of the word good, or there's only one sort of use of the word good, and it's predicated upon the fact that there are two uses of the word is in the English language. Is. Right? The first is called the is of definition, right? And for the is of definition, the subject, which comes before it in English, and the predicate, which comes after the is, um, are equal, right? The is of definition functions as an equal sign, right? So in this case, whatever is to the left of the is and to the right of the is are fully equivalent, like they're fully descriptive of each other. Right? You can swap them around without any loss or change of meaning. An example of this would be a bachelor is an unmarried male, right? What you're basically saying is a bachelor equals an unmarried male. And because these are fully descriptive and equivalent phrases, phrases, well, full descriptions of each other, you can flip them around. You can just as easily and clearly say an unmarried male is a bachelor without any loss or change in meaning. None whatsoever. The second use of the word is called the is of predication. Right? And in this case, the subject, what's to the left of the is in the sentence, and the predicate are not full descriptions of each other. The predicate merely qualifies some of the subject in some way, right? It's a partial description of some aspect of the subject, right? It'd be like saying the eye is brown, right? Now, we all grew up on Star Wars and Yoda speak, which is just, different arrangement of like the order of subject, verb, and object. But so we can understand the phrase like "I is the green," right? Um, or "green is the eye," right? We can make sense of that, but it does not maintain the same meaning, right? Um, Another example of that is when you take someone who is when you take a person, right, and you describe them in some way, like saying Professor Williams is a rock climber, right? You can't flip those two around the is of predication and maintain any sense of meaning. Right? A rock climber is Professor Williams. Right? It doesn't make the same sort of sense. Um, And that's because the predication in this case is only a partial description of the subject, right? So there's always something further that can be defined of the subject, right? Some other predication you can give it that would make just as much sense, right? Because they're not equal to each other. You can just as easily say Professor Williams is a dog lover, right? One does not fall fully within the scope and range of the other, right? There can be more dog lovers than just me. I don't think that there are, but that's because I like to think I'm special and I'm egotistical like that. Not because there aren't, right? But a bachelor just is an unmarried male, and an unmarried male is a bachelor. Like, it's logically equivalent, right? So, he takes this analysis of the use of the word is in its two forms, and Moore concludes that the word good is what's called an empty predicate, right? That is to say, it contains no meaning itself. What the word, our use of the word good refers to is always some outside standard, the same way that we use it to talk about what a hammer, right? What makes a good hammer? If we say this hammer is good, we mean it's good for hammering, right? In nails. It's always it's good at its job, right? But what's its job? That's not there in the notion of a hammer. That's not there in the notion of a hammer being good, right? The goodness refers to some outside standard separate from the hammer itself, right? It is by itself empty of all meaning. And since it is empty of all meaning, we fill in the meaning, right? We fill in the standard. And if that's the case, then the good can never be used in the sense of the is of definition, which is what would be necessary for us to talk about a person being morally good in the way that we do. When we say someone's morally good, we mean good for goodness sake. They just are good, right? It's definitional. But they're not, right? Because that's not how good can be used, according to Moore, right? That's not a way it can be used. Which leads us to the idea that saying something is good is just a relative standard, which does bring in its own problems. And that's what we'll address next.